protesters. Isn't that the way?
Everybody's got their dues in life.
I was talking to a former Army psychologist just yesterday here at the office. And he was telling me, he goes, the same thing that head of one of the big four banks. This guy was the head of the fourth largest bank.
All right.
That famous conversation I had for 3 hours on a plane from Austin to New York on American Airlines, going to be on The View. And he said, Alex, you think people will adapt and overcome to fight the New World Order in our system? They're going to adapt and overcome to submit. They're going to give in to whatever we do as long as it's incremental. And the guy had listened to the show, and he was here visiting his dad that was a retired general. And he said, this is off-the-record talk. So we talked about an hour and a half, and he couldn't convince me, and then he didn't want to talk to me more. It was arrogant at the end, but that's the whole way of these guys. And I had to get it. He got up in his suit. It was perfectly still crisp. Got his black trench coat. Looked totally perfect. I don't know how he did it. You know, it's how these guys do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had it all down. The arrogance, all of it. But you know what? He's getting his ass kicked now. But I was talking to this Army guy, and he wasn't arrogant about it. He said, you know, our military loves to fight and loves to kill. But he said they don't do that because they're bad. They didn't do that because they started out that way. They have to. You have to adapt to it and get to where you like it, or it destroys you. And the men that weren't destroyed were the ones that got to where they liked it, and the ones that are destroyed are the ones that never adapted to it. And he said, and that's what they do with the public, is they basically do bad things to us and then get us to adapt and accept it. So it's like with really smart people, that's the highest knowledge, is that those of us that see all this stuff, we are not submitting. We're trying to adapt and actually overcome it for people and build a better system. But a lot of people think they're cool if they just roll over or go along like, I don't care if they shut down half the coal power plants. I don't own coal stock. Well, neither do I. Quite frankly, my family would make more money if there wasn't coal. My mom's got some oil wells out in West Texas now that Grandma died. And my dad's got oil and gas wells. They don't make that much money where oil and gas are, but, you know, in case it's a lot for some people. But let me tell you, if there wasn't coal there keeping the price down, my dad would be filthy rich. But my dad goes around lobbying to turn the coal on. You know why? We're not pieces of crap. And that's a clean resource we've got that helps poor people and helps industry. So I don't ever want to hear I'm for coal because I work for the oil companies. I always see that. Hey, dumbasses, the oil companies have been lobbying to shut down coal. I hate stupid liberals. They're so ignorant, they don't know anything. We're going to a special report. That's why I wanted you here. Makes me so angry. So let's continue on along these lines. It doesn't even matter. The point is that, pop it anytime, Darren, it's just that it makes me so angry when I see this mindset where people think of things two-dimensionally or three-dimensionally about what at this moment gets me ahead. Okay, let's go say you steal all the money in the world, the world collapses. Now you've got piles of jewels and Rembrandts and everything else, but you're in the middle of nowhere and society's all collapsed and it's a hellhole. That's not a good world. Well, we'll just break away and have our own segregated area. That's what elites always think. That brings you down as well. You cannot screw humanity over and transcend. Humanity must transcend. And that's through free will. If humanity decides to merge with machines and go through this whole process, then that's what we've decided. But that's what individuals decided, not what you decide. And so there's a report, a clip from congressional hearings that Matt put together. The phony social cost of coal, Washington Times. The war on fossil fuels ignores carbon's benefits. And see, it's never sophisticated in these news articles. The fossil fuel industry is a bunch of different groups and countries and combines, and oil and gas tend to give money against coal. Coal is always bullied around and just fights for survival. I only promote coal because it's so much cleaner than oil, not cleaner than gas, and there's so much more of it. Hundreds of times more.
And Obama said he was going to bankrupt the coal industry.
And what he did was bankrupt our industry.
That's right.
Because listen, let's say you're a guy worth $100 million. You've got factories in the U.S. If you can go to Mexico and have energy twice as cheap or 3 times cheaper in China, no environmental standards, the workers cost 1/10 of what they do here, and you can have profits that are, say, 15 times bigger. Do you build in Mexico or do you build in China?
Well, that's exactly what...
I mean, so it's not a question of do you even build in the U.S.?
Exactly. Well, Trump's going to change all that.
But exactly. But here's the issue. You can't build in the U.S. with all those regulations. You can't sell into the market because competitors will go to China or will go to Mexico, and so you can't even do it.
That's exactly right.
So, see, that's why I harp on coal all day, folks. We have enough coal for thousands of years. It's totally clean. It's not in Mexico and places because they don't want to build the scrubbers that are super expensive to make it clean. So, Matt, you're really into this report, and you made some great points. If you want to pop in, because you've been pushing me to play this, I mean, it's kind of prima facie, as I say every 5 minutes. We know it was to shut down American industry. We know it helps China and other countries in their industry to have power much cheaper than ours. We know it makes business here prohibitive. But you didn't know you were going on air. But, Matt, I mean, I guess you wrote the description here.
Can I have a phone?
For me here. Let me go ahead and read what you said about this. At what cost? Examining coal and the cost of carbon. House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology met on February 28th to examine the social cost of carbon, which was the basis for the Obama administration's extensive push for carbon regulation. Obama's team disregarded economic factors where they were imperative to reaching an accurate cost-benefit analysis on carbon regulation, with the House Committee Chairman Andy Biggs concluding that was far overreaching. The committee was confirmed with the majority of benefits from domestic carbon regulations in the U.S. were conferring to foreign countries, or moving the benefits to foreign countries. You want to say something, Matt?
Yeah, like those benefits that the chairman discusses, Mr. Biggs, a lot of it is in regard to competition, right? Like you've been saying since before I started working here, it's the fact that, if our energy is more expensive, companies are going to go to other countries. It is a no-brainer.
It's a mathematical equation.
Oh, it sure is. And he's going to get into some of the specifics here, but one of the main pieces of data that they disregarded was a discount rate, which basically basically helps calculate the cost of regulating carbon. So without any further ado, I think we should get to the clip.
That's right. Then let's tie it into the background. Obama caught in lawsuits, confirmed, federal government confirms the documents, looting almost $200 billion out of Fannie Mae. Freddie say that you always have that tongue twister.
Fannie and Freddie.
Fannie and Freddie.
And Freddie Mac, yeah.
That's right. I mean, it just drives me crazy, stealing from private investors in it to then give it to mega banks through Obamacare in a giant scam. And then we catch them. $3 billion, Darren. You want to comment on this, Matt? You were the one that brought me the article. $3 billion to the social justice warriors of fines that banks paid for corrupt stuff they were involved in. So the banks steal hundreds of billions of dollars in some cases. It was $386 billion that two banks got caught, Wachovia and Wells Fargo, laundering drug money. So they got a $111 million fine. So first they get a slap on the wrist for billions stolen. Then they take that money and they give it to social justice warriors to overthrow the country, take our guns, and teach our kids how to be sexually active at 5. So just think about it. Crime upon crime upon crime upon crime. They shut off almost 1,000 of our power plants. Our power prices almost triple in the last 9 years because Bush started it. All this hell goes on.
Don't forget Obamacare.
Oh, then there's Obamacare. Thank God the public's dumb, doubling, tripling prices. You can keep your doctor. I mean, this is all a mass raping of America, and Trump says it stops now, and then I'm a policy wonk. I study this stuff 10 hours a day probably. Used to do it more. And I know everything he's doing is so smart and so good. And then it pisses me off because it ain't about Trump. It's about me and my family and your family, and these crooks not getting away with it. So what's 20th Century Fox do? They go start hundreds of fake websites with fake news about Trump. And then dumbasses read it and come tell me I'm fake news. I'm about as fake as you don't get. I'm the opposite. I'm the anti-fake. I mean, I'm pissed off. I could be here right now. It's quite outrageous that they commit all these crimes, Darren, on every front and nothing's being done. I agree with Governor Huckabee that they need to be put in prison or there should be investigations. What do you think about them only shutting down European and U.S. coal? What do you think the plan is if China and other countries have dirty coal and then we shut off our clean coal? Doesn't that add to actual emissions of dangerous chemicals into the atmosphere? My good man, tell me.
Don't you think we're so lucky that there's the internet, though? Because I'm thinking a lot of what we're seeing right now is backlash for Trump being elected.
You're seeing news wars.
That's why they're going after Infowars, because we were definitely instrumental in getting Trump elected.
Oh, Trump knows it.
And I think if it wasn't for the internet, that we'd probably be looking at a Jeb Bush presidency, or God forbid.
No, but they're going to. I agree with you, but let's not start. You know what? Yeah, like the Wolf says in Pulp Fiction. When they're in the car, and he says, "We can't celebrate yet. Let's not start."
Oh no, hey, revolution has just begun, right?
But I mean,
inauguration day.
Well, what I'm telling you is, we're in the war now.
Absolutely,
like Michael Savage said.
Now, a lot of people they celebrated. Of course, we all celebrated as soon as Trump was elected. But no, the battle has just begun.
That was getting the troops on the beach at Normandy.
Yep.
I mean, with a big fight.
We got a long way to go, and hopefully we'll have 8 years.
Well, we've got the initiative. We've got the superior firepower. We got history. But they could set a nuke off. They could shut the web off. Everybody's got to save these shows. They've got to remember. They've got to do their own research. They've got to know. Folks, you wanted a resistance. It's here, but the enemy's having to show itself. That's what's beautiful about Trump, and they're not just fighting America. Countries everywhere are breaking away from the globalists. Yeah, let's go to this report from the Committee on Science and Technology. Here it is.
To today's hearing entitled, At What Cost? Examining the Social Cost of Carbon.
Just 3 days ago.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome to today's joint subcommittee hearing entitled, At What Cost? Examining the Social Cost of Carbon. Today we will examine the previous administration's determination of the social cost of carbon, or SCC, and explore why the calculated value is flawed. Energy is the bedrock of our society, and yet the SCC estimate of the previous administration has killed jobs, limited innovation, and resulted in higher energy costs for American families, all in exchange for benefits that are negligible at best and non-existent at worst. The Obama administration's interagency working group, which ultimately established an enormously high SCC of $37 per ton of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere, relied on an outdated economic model and failed to take into account the White House's own Office of Management and Budget, or
It was
OMB
written up by Ken Lay at Enron as a Republican scam. Just admit it.
Quite simply, the working group used numbers that got them the results they wanted in order to advance.
By the way, I love how the Republicans come up with the scams like Obamacare and carbon tax. The Democrats do it because it's the Republicans behind the scenes that are bad. That's why they hate Trump.
The establishment Republicans, they're the worst.
And because the Republicans can at least talk. I mean, Pelosi and Waters don't know what planet they're on. Sorry, go ahead.
As we will learn today, the SCC working group ignored two major OMB recommendations for federal agency rulemaking. First, it failed to use a 7% discount rate and instead relied on rates of 2.5%, 3%, and 5%. And second, it ignored the guideline to report cost-benefit analysis from a domestic perspective. If nothing else is taken away from what will be a very technical hearing, I hope it will be these two very basic flaws. The low long-term discount rate established by the previous administration fundamentally disregards the notion that the American economy is resilient and can respond to potential future threats with technological development and innovation. As to the flaw of the previous administration's decision to focus on CO2 emissions from a global perspective, this approach leaves the U.S. footing the bill for costly regulations that are based on benefits conferred to other countries. It is simply not right for Americans to be bearing the brunt of cost when the majority of benefits will be conferred away from home. By ignoring OMB guidelines, the current SCC models leave critical components out of the discussion. If the OMB guidelines would have been followed, the social cost of carbon would have been significantly lower. The previous administration disregarded scientific integrity by overestimating climate change resulting from greenhouse gas emissions. In order to push an expensive regulatory agenda, the administration inflated the SCC to justify costly regulations in response to the allegedly terrible CO2 emissions, terrible damage CO2 emissions will cause in the future. The SCC is nothing but a one-sided manipulation of parameters to fit the policy-driven agendas of the previous administration. These alarmist tactics need to stop. Today's hearing is intended to uncover the real truth and deception behind the SCC. America's strength emanates from our resilience and flexibility. Attempts to justify government regulations over industry innovation hinders growth and development. I look forward to working with the Trump administration to renew faith in American ingenuity and technological development.